Good afternoon, class, and welcome to week 5, I believe. Um, for my online and residential syllabus this term, I chose to do a class on colonial American history. For this video and for the module, during a specific week in the course, I would focus on the Jamestown colony, which I think is eventually going to be my eventual dissertation for the PhD program. The course would be more geared specifically toward, I guess, an undergrad that we could spend a week on, but we could do a high school course as well. We could spend a considerable amount of time doing some readings and some research on some of the projects that are currently going on in Jamestown. And I would focus on basically a quick history of the colony and its importance in American history, and try to debunk the stigma that Jamestown colonists have got throughout historiography, or researchers have pinned on the colonists of being lazy, incompetent, and constant infighting, which through even this video quickly, or through the week that I would teach the course, I would definitely debunk these myths that these colonists were not lazy. They actually were the total opposite of that. And they had to be to make this colony survive through what they had to endure. Anyways, Jamestown colony was the first permanent colony in America. And I get it. There were some prior, but they started, but they did not finish. For some reason, no matter whether it be drought, starvation, Native American slaughters, they didn't last. The only one that sort of lasted was the Spanish in Florida, but that was in Florida. Didn't really have much relevance to the colonies in America of that time. Prior to Jamestown, Roanoke actually had 2 expeditions. Neither of them panned out. Actually, everyone's heard of the lost colony of Roanoke. And then prior to that, North America was filled with different Native American tribes, groups, and even before them. Sorry, my video froze. There were Vikings in the northeast that came in. There was even Incas all the way from Mexico that were inhabiting in North America. But for a permanent settlement in North America and the colonies, one has to look at Jamestown. And a quick history on Jamestown was in late December of 1606. King George gave a charter to the Virginia Company to set sail to the New World, and in December, 3 ships left England for the New World, specifically Virginia: the Godspeed, the Susan Constant, and the Discovery. They left England. They ran across the trade winds, which was kind of weird then. It took them, off the east coast of Africa, where they make stops there, and then continue in a southwest direction down to like Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, the Caribbean islands, where they'd stop, resupply, and then head straight north to Virginia. It seems kind of odd now, where why wouldn't they just come straight across? But back then, no motors. They used sails, so they had to go with the wind. So they reached Puerto Rico on April 6th of 1607, resupplied, and went straight north, landed in Cape Henry on April 26, 1607, which Cape Henry was 30 miles inland from the Atlantic on the Chesapeake. They landed there. They opened the charter from the king with basically their orders. None of these people knew, except the captain, what their orders were to be. But once they read the orders, they realized that they were supposed to move inland 100 miles up the Chesapeake and James, basically to stay safe from the Spanish, because the Spanish at this time were brutal. They had an actual navy, so anyone that was trying to establish lands or colonies along the East Coast, the Spanish would come by and just destroy them. So they figured if they were 100 miles inland, they had protection. So they left Cape Henry. They put a cross there for the first actual English there, and took 14 days. They sailed down, scoping out land. They came across the island slash peninsula on the north side of the James River. They thought this would be a great place. It had trees. It was wet. They had abundance of water. So they stopped there, called it Jamestown in honor of King James over in Europe. So there you go. That was on May 14th. Jamestown was established. Now, looking back, which obviously these people didn't know this, these settlers, there was 104 of them, all men. Actually, 105 left. One child died on the way. So 104 men landed in probably the worst place possible to land, probably north of Florida. This is because they landed in the middle of a Powhatan Native American chiefdom ran by Chief Powhatan that had over 30,000 Native Americans. And they basically planted their fort right in the middle of this this nation. So not good. That's one reason. The second reason was they planted it in a swamp, basically, that was full of brackish water, which if you don't know what that is, it's basically seawater and fresh water mixed. It turns like brackish. So the tide would come in, the waters would rise. They would come in and collect their water, drink that water. But basically, we all know you can't drink salt water, and the effects of salt water is just, especially back then, were devastating. Oh, and the last thing, one more thing, why it was another, this has nothing to do with really the landscape, and they didn't know this ahead of time either, but it was the worst. They were in the middle of the worst drought, actually towards the end of the worst drought in North American history, from basically 800 years prior until 1610. It was the worst drought ever in North America. So they landed in 1607. They had to deal with 3 more years of the worst drought ever. Plus, on top of that, they were dealing with the 700 plus years of the drought. So the soil was a mess. It was devastating. You couldn't grow anything, and if you could, they didn't know how. They didn't grow this over there in England. So those are the 3 reasons why not a good spot to land. But anyways, they had to make it work. They were coming there for a reason. They knew they had to get it to work. So luckily they had Captain John Smith. He was their leader. He immediately went to work building a fort right there on the island. They built a 3-sided palisade fort. They have bulwarks on each of the 3 corners with a cannon on each one, basically protect themselves from the Native Americans. They got that done in June. So they had from June to basically October of decent time. They had provisions from their ships. They were trying to grow some crops. They were meeting with Chief Powhatan and some of his natives there, trying to figure out how to grow maize, which is corn. So they had a slight idea. They were trying to, get this stuff to grow. Come October, winter in Virginia, not good. A couple of the colonists, unfortunately, stole some corn from the Powhatan Nation and got caught, which created a storm, a flurry in the relationship between the Indians and the settlers. So basically what happened was they were out of food come winter. The Indian Nation now basically had them barricaded inside their fort, those 100 settlers, which they call now the starving time. It was bad. The whole winter, no food. They can't leave to even scavenge from food. There was reports of boiling shoes to eat, digging up graves and eating the bodies. And now that we know now after excavations that there was actually cannibalism. George Percy, one of the leaders of that time, here's a quote I'm going to read you of how dire the times was. And he quotes, "And now famine beginning to look ghastly and pale in every face, that nothing was spared to maintain life and to do those things which seems incredible, as to dig up dead corpses out of graves and eat them. Bottom line is, when spring came, only 38 settlers survived. These 38 said, we're done, we're out of here. They had a ship there. They got on the ship, said, Jamestown, thanks, but no thanks, we're leaving, we're going back to England. They set sail, they got all the way out to the Atlantic coast. Just then, whether divine or what, but they came across 3 ships of Captain Smith coming back after he left, actually right away, to go back and give a report what they had to the king. But Smith and 3 ships came back right there, stopped them, turned them around, went back to Jamestown with 300 more colonists, and basically started all over. That's when Jamestown really started. They built a school, they built a church, and they had a guy on these ships. His name is John Rolfe, who some of you probably have heard of. He brought tobacco to Jamestown colony, which basically was a boom for Jamestown. It made them very wealthy for a while. They were sending this tobacco back to England for profit. They were selling it to the Native Americans. But like every good thing comes to an end. It actually ended up coming to an end then. You know, a bunch of infighting between colonists. England was taking advantage of them money-wise, so it didn't work out. But more or less, the colony was already established by then. In 16, moving ahead to 1619, the first General Assembly was created in the Americas in Jamestown in a church. It made the first laws in America. These dealt with tobacco and actually workers' rights in 1619. So that set a precedence for everyone else to follow. You know, everyone knows the story of Pocahontas. John Rolfe would marry Pocahontas, take her back to England, which she unfortunately passed away in England. And then moving ahead to 1621, women came over to Jamestown. Then there were still no women really. 1621, the king sent women over to Jamestown, basically to reproduce and marry, to keep the colony going. So they, you know, England wanted to profit off of these guys. However, in 1622, there was a huge Powhatan Indian massacre on the colonists, where over 300 colonists were killed. But unfortunately, the Powhatans suffered just as much loss during the attack, which basically set the demise for the Powhatan Nation. They kind of disappeared out of the picture for a while. So did Jamestown, really. They stayed status quo for for about 20 years, up till about 1640. Then settlers started going on their own, moving inward, inland more, to higher, drier ground. And then actually the capital from Jamestown moved to Williamsburg in 1640s. And basically Jamestown was abandoned, privately owned, ever since, until actually up to today. There's a foundation that owns it. But that's a quick rundown, a quick skinny of Jamestown. We only have 15 minutes, so sorry so short. There's so much to discover in Jamestown. It's so unique. Actually today, there's a current archaeological dig going on in Jamestown, headed up by Dr. William Kelso, who's actually a student from Ohio here. He got his PhD in Ohio, where I'm from. Went to Jamestown because he looked at the maps, and up till 1984 or 1994, everyone thought the fort, the original James Fort, that 3-sided fort, was gone, was actually washed away in the James River. After him looking at the maps, he's looking at some measurements, he's like, this doesn't make sense. That fort should be there. So he took a team over there, started digging, and within a week, they actually found the fort, which is ironic. It's almost amazing, because during the Revolutionary War, the American soldiers kept British soldiers there captive, and then onto the Civil War, the Confederates had they built a fort there actually as well, a lookout fort on top of the old James Fort. So Kelso had to remove the old James Fort to find, or the old Confederate fort to find the James Fort. It's crazy, but anyways, huge foundation is taken over. That the Jamestown Rediscovery Project is the current project going on. There is a museum there. Great place to stop. If you get a chance to go out there and check it out, you can learn more about, you know, these first original 100 settlers that established the first colony in America. Thanks for all for listening. Take care. Goodbye.